Welcome, one and all, to the Spuddies. My first ever attempt at ranking every game I've played in this year of our Lord, 2023. Tonight, the creme de la creme will vie for the coveted and never-before-seen Spuddie, the pinnacle of gaming recognition. In this whimsical ranking extravaganza, understand that these rankings are entirely arbitrary, crafted from the fabric of categories I deem paramount in the realm of video games. Spanning nearly 2 decades, each game underwent the scrutiny in areas such as story, graphics, UI and controls, how powerful each game made me feel, glitchiness, mechanics, characters, and most importantly, the amount of loot I was able to scoot. Which brings me to the worst ranked game on our list, BIOMUTANT. BIOMUTANT kicked off with a promising start, capturing my attention with its robust looting and crafting system. You could find different types of parts of items all over the place, and then when you stuck them together, you made some sort of weird gun that didn't really make much sense, but what did it matter? It was shooting lightning and bullets at the same time. Through the first 2 hours, I was enthralled by the combat and the weird story aspects. The fact that you followed around this weird little rodent thing and was climbing on top of other weird rodent things, and somehow they all talked, but it was gurgly and weird. It was just interesting. It kind of gripped me, right? Unfortunately, after the first 2 hours, you start to notice the cracks. The combat and even the boss fights started to feel trivial. There was 4 or 5 boss fights, I can't remember at the moment, but only the first one you felt any sense of fear. Everything else, it was just run around in a circle and shoot the boss, and the boss will do some things, and you just have to avoid them, basically QTE type stuff, and you'll kill him when the bar drops down eventually. And the same thing happened with the combat just in general with everything. I was just slapping buttons and I was killing things, which doesn't make you feel powerful when no bosses can seem to stand up to you, even the big, scary, hairy beastmen. The other big issue I had with the game was the story. It started out in this weird post-apocalyptic world, and I, in general, love games with post-apocalyptic worlds. There are plenty out there. Fallout, other Fallouts, and some other ones that I don't remember at this moment. But beyond the set piece of apocalypse, the story felt very hollow. You would go tribe to tribe after you picked your main tribe, either the good guys or the Nazis, and go and fight tribes and say, hey, I defeated you, now you must join me into a bigger nation. Which was interesting if all of the fights didn't feel exactly the same. And I believe by the time I got to the 3rd tribe, that was just okay, you did 3, you want to just make a nation and finish this out here? It felt really weird. The game was saying, yeah, we get it, these tribe fights aren't really the best, so if you want to just continue doing the main story, here's your option. At the end, I genuinely struggled to complete BIOMUTANT. And at the end is where BIOMUTANT falls on the list, being our number 11th game out of 11 on the games I've played in 2023. Resident Evil 6 slides on into the chart at number 10. In my system, it actually ranked lower than BIOMUTANT, but the game was insane. I was laughing most of the time at the different story elements of it, and just extremely frustrated at the controls for most of the game. One of the things that was crazy was how you were supposed to switch modes on a gun. To this day, I do not remember what that button was, but I had to look it up so many times. There were really cool elements of when you had a different character, the UI looked a little bit different, and it wasn't just a color swap, but they actually built different UIs, which was cool, except for navigating them was an act of God, if I'm being honest. And there were several puzzle jumping sections that you had a chase sequence that was with it, and you couldn't actually do it with a mouse and keyboard. I'm not talking oh, he's not good with a mouse and keyboard. I'm talking the angles they had you run at and jump sometimes were impossible to do with a mouse and keyboard with just WASD. So I had to switch to the controller to run those sequences, and then at the end, immediately switch back so I could fire my gun because I ain't aiming with no controller. The other thing that this game was full of was QTEs. There were more than any other game I've ever played. And I'm not a person who plays a bunch of story, like heavy narrative games without any gameplay in them, like walking sims and that, which I'm sure have more QTEs. But in a Resident Evil game, it seemed pretty crazy. I think most of the issues were due to the port itself and not necessarily the game. I mean, the story was crazy, but that's kind of just Resident Evil, right? Nevertheless, the crazy, mind-boggling story coupled with the terrible controls landed Resident Evil 6 at number 10. Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell Blacklist sneaks in at number 9, despite, or perhaps due to the fact that I struggle to remember anything about the game. I considered placing it below Resident Evil 6, but I think 9 is where it belongs. In the realm of stealth-based games, storylines often take a backseat, and Blacklist is no exception. It was a digging up game, and my first Splinter Cell game that I've ever played. My inherent aversion to stealth gameplay often contributed to me running around, getting in loud shootouts with NPCs, hiding in corners until they gave up on searching for me. That was pretty much the gameplay loop of Blacklist for me. I would say that perhaps because I don't enjoy stealth gameplay, it did contribute to the lower position on the list. I think if there was a list of games that was more unbiased, it would have ended up a little bit higher. I don't think it was a bad game, it's just not a game for me. While I do recall enjoying the stealth that I managed to pull off, as, climbing on pipes on the ceiling and dropping on unsuspecting guards, Blacklist ended up landing at number 9. But hey, at least it's not Biomutant. Screaming in at number 8 is Skryim. Ah, Skryim, what can I say about you that hasn't already been said in the 15 different times you were released? This year was my first time ever, well, technically third if you count the 2 times I tried and then didn't continue after like an hour, to beat the game's main story. I started the game as a 200 follower reward, forced me to play at least 8 hours of the game before giving up like I had before. Remarkably, around the 3-hour mark, something clicked, and I found myself genuinely enjoying the experience. Skryim is actually a really good exploration game. I had played Oblivion previous to this, and a lot of the points of interest started to look very similar because you could tell they were copy and pasted and just reorganized the rooms. And obviously Skyrim's going to have some of that as well because Bethesda's gonna Bethesda. But the large scale of the world and the beauty of just everything around you really makes you feel like you're exploring a new area each time you jump into a cave or a castle. Or those frickin' wisps come out of nowhere and decide to fuck your day up. Deep-seated wisp trauma aside, the combat in the game felt pretty boring. You had a huge skill tree to apply, but it was mostly percentages and things that you don't really notice when you're in the heat of battle. The best part of Skyrim's combat was when you hit a critical and slapped a man all the way back to Oblivion, making him think about his choices here on Nirn. The biggest flaw I found with Skryim was the main story. It was inoffensive, but was a very bland rise-to-power story that you see in so many different pieces of media today. What kept me playing Skryim were the side quests and the guild quests. There were some really good stories that were built off of just some random NPC you run into some point in time. While not Bethesda's most glaring misstep, looking at you Fallout 76, Skryim exemplifies the peril of prioritizing quantity over quality, securing its place at number 8. Arriving deep within the rankings at number 7 is The Evil Within. An unexpected gem from the Digging Up series, I usually steer clear of horror games due to their over-reliance on my least favorite elements, stealth and jump scares. However, The Evil Within managed to break the mold with its exceptional narrative. It was a psychological horror about being in a psychological hospital inside the psyche of another person, which will always lead you to some really interesting and horrific situations where burning bodies became a casual experience for me. From start to finish, the story kept me guessing. I didn't know where I was, what monster I was going to run into next, and if I was even in the real world. My complaint with horror games is normally the lack of ammo and the small variety of weapons you get, and this was not the case with The Evil Within. I felt like it had a good balance of knowing that I couldn't just pray and spray down my enemies, but that every bullet did count. But I was never left without any ammo completely, which would have probably soft-locked me if I'm being honest. There were several moments where I was confidently pointing the shotgun at a big enemy who was almost dead, and then I heard the click of an empty barrel. The loot scarcity and genuinely gruesome and terrifying monsters make The Evil Within a very, very good horror game. I would say the best one on the list. But unfortunately, this isn't a horror ranking list, it's my random game list that I've played this year. So, that lands it comfortably at number 7. Staking its claim at a reasonable position of number 6 is GreedFall. Despite not being a horror game, the immediate thing that you notice with GreedFall is that the facial animations are terrifying. It is not even like an Uncanny Valley thing, it's more of a just like a Walking Dead thing. What was weird was it kind of gaslit you into thinking they were good facial animations after playing for a while. I think I was probably 10 hours into the game or so, and I had gotten used to the facial animations. I was like, oh, these, they're a little off, but they're doing pretty good. It's not bad. And then I can't remember which game it was, but I started a different RPG that had come out recently, and I was then in shock at how good the facial animations were on this new RPG. It's been quite some time since I encountered a game with facial animations that were so unnerving, which is unfortunate because that is the darkest mark on a game that otherwise has a really interesting main story and characters with fun backstories. Landing on a mysterious island with your cousin in charge of a colony and working your way through different areas trying to figure out, is magic actually real? And fighting a bunch of weird beasts grown from the ground is all fun. Outside of the facial animations that only an AI-generated mother could love, the other issue I had was the combat difficulty. If you know me in any way, you know that I am the last person to complain about combat difficulty. Yet, in GreedFall, once you are about 10 hours into the game, you basically could kill anything with a very limited difficulty. I think even to major bosses, I only died 5 to 10 times in this game throughout the whole playthrough. And if you watch my Dark Souls 2 playthrough, you know that's very rare. With most of the combat challenge gone, at the end of the game, the story did most of the heavy lifting. And in my list, it was only able to carry GreedFall to number 6. Portaling in at just over halfway up the list is the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion at number 5. It's the other Elder Scrolls game that I played in 2023, and it manages to outshine its successor. Not in technical prowess, or combat, or even graphically, but the story is so much more captivating than Skyrim's. Oblivion came out in a quaint time when trying to sell horse armor for money was considered out of the ordinary. And while that is most likely a good thing, it does mean that most of the design qualities that we have come to expect from modern games are often left behind. Although that is not unlike my review of Skryim, which apparently Bethesda has not yet learned this lesson, as I have also played Starfield and it still has some of the things missing that you would think it would need. Rant aside, Oblivion also had a lot of bugs, and that was after I installed the mod pack that was supposed to resolve a fair number of them. And we also find the origin of Skyrim's noodle-based combat, where you slap and never feels really that good. You know, it also has Azura's Star, which who knows what that's even supposed to be for. A major drawback of Oblivion is the enemy leveling system, which prevents you from ever feeling truly powerful or experiencing a sense of progression. One very iconic situation I got into was the wisp situation, where I was like a high level and the wisps were kicking my ass. That probably shouldn't happen in a normal video game. And while it seems like I may be complaining a lot about Oblivion, it's because there's such a good game there somewhere. And it was a ton of fun. A modern interpretation of Oblivion, like Sky Oblivion, may fix a lot of the issues that I found playing the over 15-year-old game in 2023. But after everything that we have talked about, Oblivion was still the best Elder Scrolls game that I played in 2023. And yet, it still lands in about the middle at number 5. Dodging 7 other games, Dark Souls 2 rolls in at number 4, just shy of the podium. It was my first dive into the Dark Souls franchise. I had played Dark Souls 3 with some friends in co-op, and I did not like it. I was not a fan of the whole super hard combat thing. But when Dark Souls 2 was rolled as a digging up game, I decided, as the rules of digging up, I have to give it a try. So I gave it an honest try for 4 hours on my first stream. And near the end, I was actually enjoying the fight. Once you kind of get the dodging and the attacking and how, you're supposed to work, I was not good at the game. Don't let me get you wrong. I was really bad at the game. But I was having a good time. And especially when you finally defeat that big boss that you've been struggling with for an hour and a half, and they fall and you get the good loot and the big souls. It's just a great feeling. And I think that's what pushed Dark Souls 2 so far up the list, is just that feeling of defeating the big bad and taking him out. I got that feeling a little bit from the Surge when I played it, but the Surge had such weird timing on the dodges that you never really felt like you were really hitting the numbers, right? But this Dark Souls 2, even though it's considered kind of the bad Dark Souls, I had a great time with it. And I will say it has made me add Dark Souls 1 to my list of games that I want to play. Even though I ended up with 500 deaths, or over 500 deaths by the conclusion, and I'm very bad at it, Dark Souls 2, with its blend of exhilarating victories and occasional frustrations, or sometimes way more than occasional frustrations, earns its well-deserved spot at number 4 in the ranks. Pirouetting in at number 3 is Atomic Heart. It shouldn't be a surprise that a game with voluptuous twirling robot mommies would make it into the top 3 in the ranking. However, moving past the robot ballerinas and uncomfortable upgrade machines, the game was legitimately fun to play. It was in an environment that I loved. Any futuristic game or a game that involves some crazy alternative history is something that I really just, suck that up, And the music score in Atomic Heart was probably, it's hard for me to say, but if Doom Eternal wasn't on this list, Atomic Heart would have had the best music. Hands down. You start a fight in this derelict theater area, and you activate a robot, and it starts playing this classical music, which you start shooting around, and then the enemies all come in, and then the music kicks up, and oh man, that fight felt so good. And it was like being in a musical, like a shooting FPS musical. I still think about it. I listened to that song on its own several times. The story was not super groundbreaking, but it was entertaining enough, and there was definitely some weird, gooey twists to it. If you get past all of the sexy robots, there is a really good game under there. And with all of those elements combined, Atomic Heart secures bronze at number 3. Blasting its way into number 2 is Doom Eternal, the second installment in the Doom remake that builds upon the adrenaline-fueled demonic horde madness that Doom brought to us in 2016. It really excels at instilling a sense of unstoppable power as Doom Guy, and the music complements it so much. As you're killing and shooting, and there's just heavy metal music going as you're chainsawing a demon for a piñata of different resources, there's just no other feeling in the world. It doesn't have a big narrative arc or big story other than demon lords have taken over and culling the earth and we need to kill them. But honestly, for Doom, that's enough. And even when you're moving through the world, the environment tells a very interesting commentary by itself. There was one unforgettable moment when I was gazing up at the stage to witness this colossal humanoid robot frozen mid-action impaling a giant alien beast. As I saw that, I was actually like, am I going to get to pilot a big old human robot thing? Unfortunately not. I mean, maybe the third Doom will let you do that. We did still fight some pretty big alien beasts. Doom is not about the story. I mean, I don't think any of the Dooms, maybe Doom 3, which I hadn't played, kind of focused more on the story, but people I don't think like Doom 3, so. Doom makes up for the absence of the story in just having the insane non-stop action. And it's a bit of an anomaly in the list, because it is a game that made it to number 2 that doesn't really have a story, which is something that I'm really normally focused pretty hard on, story and loot. And Doom doesn't really have much of either. I mean, it's got an upgrade system, but I wouldn't say that it's got any loot. But yet, it still reaches up to almost number 1. And the victor of the inaugural Spuddy Awards is finally here. As you've probably already read on your screen, it's the 2023 remake of Dead Space. Honestly, when Dead Space 2023 came out, I was excited to play it. And when the Digging Up series actually rolled it, I dove right in. I had a lot of nostalgia for the Dead Space series. I played the original 2 when they came out on Xbox 360 and just loved the story. And as I've said before, I'm not a fan of horror games, but Dead Space is a little different because it's in space and there's a lot of cool lore behind a lot of the Dead Space series. The Digging Up series seems to really enjoy Dead Space because I had actually rolled Dead Space 3 in 2022. And played that for the first time. It had come out when I was in college, and I never really approached it. But I actually, even though it's completely different than the first 2 Dead Space, I did have a really good time with Dead Space 2 even. But when I launched the remake of Dead Space and was jumping in as Isaac, immediately immersed by the story and the lighting, it was just, oh man. And the gameplay, it was so good. Dead Space remake is one of the best remakes I've ever played. And I say that after having played the Mass Effect Legendary Edition, which was a really good remake, but I felt like a new Dead Space to me. And maybe it's because I have a bad memory and I don't remember playing Dead Space in 2006 or whenever it came out, but here it is. I won't go as far as to declare Dead Space as the pinnacle of gaming in 2023, because that would be impossible with Baldur's Gate 3 existing, which if I would have finished before this list was made, probably would have gotten the gold. But it unquestionably secures the title of the best game that I've completed in 2023. EA's venture into the revival of Dead Space turned out to be more than just a cash grab. It's a triumphant return to a beloved and chilling universe that I have liked for most of my adult life. And that's why it secures the 2023 Spuddy. I just wanted to thank everybody at the end of this video for watching the whole thing, and if you liked it, please slap that like button, as they say on this site. I just, and I wanted to thank everybody throughout the year of 2023 for watching and subscribing and following and all the various things we do on video social media. This was my first attempt at making scripted content, and I know that it got a little tonally different. I mean, the whole thing's probably taken me around 20 to 25 hours to actually put all together, record, make, and a lot of things that I've never done before, like edit audio and edit videos this in-depth. And it's been a really fun experience, and I'd like to make more in the future. And I know it's probably a bit scuffed, and everyone loves to come into sub 300 subscriber YouTubers and see what their opinions on video games is. So I do appreciate everybody for stopping in here. Again, I just want to thank everybody on Twitch and YouTube who stopped by to just hang out and chat and watch me fumble my way through various video games. And, I felt like this was a good culmination of everything that we've done, and here's to another great year.